Hi everybody, Rob here, and it's been quite a while. I think that my last upload was probably over a year ago, and there's a reason for that. I've been moving house. I moved out of my old studio, which you probably saw last, and my house just wasn't suitable for recording videos. Too much noise from a busy road and neighbours, that kind of thing. And I'm in my new place. You can see I'm standing in my kitchen. I'm surrounded by lots of garden. There's no noise from neighbours, nothing like that. But the main reason is I am not a fan of the subscription model of having software. And as much as I love Cinema 4D, and I do still use it, and same with Maya, I've been investigating different ways of working, different tools, different workflows. And I've tinkered with Blender a lot over the last kind of decade or so, and I didn't find it overly suited to the way I like to work. But it's changed and it's developed a lot. It's become much more kind of professional feeling, much more robust, which is a big thing for me, because clearly, you know, if you're going to do 3D work for clients, you don't want to be rebooting computers and losing files and all that kind of hellish nightmare that could happen. So over the last couple of years, I've been using Blender more and more alongside other tools just to see if it's actually viable. And I'm happy to say it is. Blender's great. It does an awful lot, and there's no subscription cost. In fact, there's no cost at all if you don't want to. Although I would suggest, if you have Blender, if you can afford it, give them a little bit. You can donate on their page. When you download it, I think you're given a little pop-up that reminds you maybe to give an offering. And if you can, do, because I think that will keep the tool growing and progressing, and that can only be a good thing for artists. So I debated how I would kind of share my experience moving, not completely, but integrating Blender's tools into my workflow. And I thought maybe I'd do a basics kind of like introduction video, but there are bucket loads of those. There are some really, really good Blender trainers out there, and they've done a better job on that than I could probably do. But if you're interested, let me know in the comments, and I'm happy to do one if that's useful for you. And so what I've done here is I've compiled a list of kind of like my favorite tips and tools, keyboard shortcuts, just different things that I find speed up my workflow considerably. So over the next few videos, I'll release those, starting with this one today, and kind of consider them almost like a glossary, really, just a collection of really useful tools that you can use to keep creative and keep fast. If there are any kind of like elements of the software you'd like me to cover, I've got pretty good with all of it now, then let me know. I'm going to be sharing some rigs for lighting and cameras and that sort of thing as well over the coming months. So hopefully you find that useful. Let's dive into Blender itself. Let's boot up the Mac, and we'll get going, and I'll share some of these tips. But it's great to be back, like really happy to be back. It's been far too long, and I enjoy recording these videos for you guys. So let me know what you want more of. Let me know if this has been of any use to you, and we'll get cracking. Okay, so for tip number one, what I want to do is I want to create some kind of a sideways mohawk across the top of his head. So in edit mode, and press 3 for face select, I'm just going to shift click a few of these faces and hit E for extrude, and you'll find what happens is they go straight up, which is fine. They're constrained to the axis, and you could also go in the Y axis or the Z axis or the X axis, but really not what I want at all. So I'm just going to undo that, hit Control and F to bring up your faces panel, and choose extrude faces along normals. And now when I move my cursor up, I get exactly what I want. Now this is a lifesaver in so many situations, because you keep the proportions compared to each other, like relative to each other, but it moves along the faces, not the axis, and that's a massive time saver, because you don't have to extrude up and then try and scale them to fit, and it never quite works out. So that's my first tip. Okay, here's a useful thing to know. When you do a loop cut, let's just take this edge here. The actual loop around is going to take an average of the length of this edge and this edge, so that the cut will be proportionate along this face and it will keep that shape, which is really useful for a lot of things. But sometimes you might want the cut to actually follow this edge here all the way along, so that we end up with a cut that goes this way. And to do that, it's real simple. Just activate the tool, and as you're dragging along, just hit the E key, and you can see that it's now following that face there all the way along, which is useful, as you can imagine, for all sorts of different things. If you want to flip which edge it is that it's using, just hit the F key, and now you can see that it's going to move that cut all the way along based on this end. I'll just do that again, so hit F, now it's flipped. And another thing it does, which is quite useful, is that as you get to the end, it will actually taper it off like so, which is quite cool. Now in Blender you have the option, let's go into vertex mode, let's select one point. Now if you want to increase this selection, the easiest way of doing it is to hold down Control and use the plus button on the number pad, and you can see this increases your selection based on the start point that you selected, and the minus key shrinks the selection back down to that first point. Now plus and minus on the top row of your keyboard will actually zoom in and out of your viewport, so don't get them confused, but it's a very quick one. And I've found myself in Blender especially using the number pad more and more and more, because there are lots of things that it does, which we'll cover in future tips. Okay, this next tip is super useful for all kinds of things, especially hard surface modeling. So I'm just going to select a bunch of polygons here. If you're designing like spaceships and you want to build Nernies and Greebles and things, then this one's super cool. So all you do is make your selection and you hit I to inset. So you just drag your cursor and you make your inset like this. Now, however, if you press I a second time, it will treat all these faces as individuals, like so. Pretty cool. It's not what I want for this particular example. Now, to save yourself having to extrude these out, if that's what you wanted to do, you could hit Control and you can pull it, and they just work along the normals, and you can go, inwards and outwards. It's super useful, really cool, and saves a bunch of time. If you imagine making a Star Destroyer or something, then this is really, really useful. Now, another thing you can do, let's just go I. Now, if you hit O, now you'll get these outer kind of limits of that inset growing, which is also useful if you wanted to make a divot around it or do some extra surface detailing. Then that's the way to do it. So it's I, O, and Control. Like so. Okay, so extrusions are usually pretty simple. You select a couple of faces, you hit E, and you extrude out, no problem. But when you extrude inwards, you sometimes get this odd face like this one here, where the extrude just creates some unnecessary geometry that you might not need. So let's undo that, and instead press Alt-E and choose Extrude Manifold, and now, when you extrude back or forward, you get a much more easy to work with result without any of that extraneous geometry that you don't want. Okay, so sometimes you'll be in a scene, more likely than not, far more complex than this, and you'll spot something that's not quite sitting where it should be. So you can see this cone here isn't sitting on the floor, and you can, hit G and then Z, and you can try and line it up like this, but the 3D viewport isn't always best for this kind of thing. You can see that you can't quite do it. So if you hit Control Alt Q, you get a quad view, and then we can zoom in here, and you can see this red line is marking where our floor is. If I then go G, Z, I can move it down. Now, of course, there are other ways of doing this. You could do it numerically. You could do it using snapping. But in certain scenes where there's a lot going on, eyeballing it like this is much, much easier. And of course, you can hit Control Alt Q and go back to your 3D viewport, and then you know everything's where it should be. So if you're in a modelling session and you've accidentally moved or scaled or rotated something, now you can press N and you can go into the fields here and you can reset everything here, but there's a much quicker way. If you press Alt G, that centres it back to the original point, and Alt S will change the scale, and Alt R will reset your rotation. As simple as that. Easy way to get everything back to the centre of your world. It's a simple tip, but comes in really useful, especially if you've just been, using the axis for something. Say you're moving an object along an axis and you accidentally press the G button again. Well, that will save you. Obviously, you can Command Z to undo steps, but sometimes you'll continue modeling not realizing that you're not centered, and then that would undo all of your hard work. So here's a cool way of doing that. One of the best tips I can give anybody using Blender is the use of some of the shift hotkeys. So if you hit Shift A, you've probably seen this one. You get all of the kind of added options here. So you're adding a mesh, adding a curve, lights, cameras, all that kind of thing. If you hit Shift S, you get a selection pop-up. So you can make use of any of these. Very, very good for working fast. And Shift Spacebar, essentially, if we go into Shift Spacebar, you can see you have all of the options that you would normally find up here, top left. And if you hit Tab to go into, I haven't got an object, let's add an object. Let's just stick a cube in here for now. If you hit Tab to make this editable, you see how this list on the left here changes. If you then hit Shift Spacebar, you get all of the new ones as well. So it doesn't matter what's showing here, it will always turn up in this pop-up. And the reason I think this is so good is because you don't want to be constantly moving your cursor all the way over to the left, and you can do it wherever you are. So you can stay focused on the object you're working on, but still have access to those things.